Perfect.
build something.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right. So let's start with your full name.
Joseph Matthews McCracken, and that's with an S on the Matthews.
Okay, and can you spell that for me?
Matthews.
Okay. And where were you born?
A little town in Alabama called Madison, and it was, and I think still is, the county seat of Huntsville, which has become a real city with the advent of the Redstone and some of those things.
Okay. And,
Since World War II.
Okay. And what's your birthday?
Now I have to admit or use the 2nd of May, 1922.
Okay. So how old does that make you currently?
94 and a big fraction.
Okay. And what was your full rank and what part of the armed services were you in?
I was in the Air Corps. At that time we were only the Air Corps. It has since become the Air Force. And I presently hold the rank in the reserve of Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay. And and what unit were you in? What was your
We flew into combat with the 453rd Bomb Group out of England.
Okay.
We were based in England.
Okay. And what was your job? What was your role?
I was a B-24 pilot.
Okay. Okay. And did you receive any medals for your time in the service?
Air medals they handed out like beer nuts. I honestly don't remember. Nothing magnanimous, no.
Okay. Okay, and what year did you enter the service?
1943 is when I enlisted,
Okay.
or took the exams or whatever. And then we were in combat in 1944. So spent over a year milling around here, primarily in Texas for training, all the way from ground training on up through air training.
Okay, so we'll talk about your childhood a little bit. What do you remember about the town that you grew up in? Is there anything specific that is in your memory that?
Well, I lived with my parents, of course, in Alabama until I must have been 10 years old, thereabouts. Mm-hmm. We moved around. We were living in Birmingham in whatever date that would make it, around 1932, I guess. Low point in the whole world as far as money, that sort of thing. And Dad managed to get a job with the U.S. Rubber Company, who's headquartered for him in Cincinnati. But the job entailed traveling in a territory, so Dad selected Middlesboro, Kentucky, as a place to rent and live. So that's where we moved to. I had my youngest, I'll leave it alone, younger brother. Was 6 years younger than I. And I went into the 4th grade in Middlesboro when we got up there. I had gone to school in Birmingham, started and attended in Birmingham. I remember stuff about it, but not all that vividly. Middlesboro was a great place to grow up in, and it 10,000 people, and I don't think it's grown too many more than that. May have lost some. In the middle of the soft coal country, so it was never tremendously prosperous. It just had everything it needed for kids to grow up in. Good school, I thought, still do. It was laid out by an English group. I don't remember their name now. If I worked at it, I probably could. But the names in Middlesboro, which is an English derivative, were usually, or most of the town, the streets' names were taken from, a lot of them were taken from England. We lived on Edgewood Road, which is not exactly British, but Dorchester and Manchester and British.
All the Chesters.
From that.
And how many siblings did you have?
Just the one brother.
Just the one. Mm-hmm. Okay. And your parents, what were their names?
Dad's name was Samuel Wilson McCracken. Mm-hmm. Mother was Charlotte Ellen Sisson McCracken. Her maiden name was Sisson. Mm-hmm. They both were born in Alabama and grew up there. Mother was reared in or near Anniston, Alabama. Dad came from Huntsville. His father died when Dad was quite young. Mother's mother died when she was quite young. I knew in later years my mother's father, just very briefly. He was in poor health and lived in Noank, Connecticut. And in 1930, I believe it was 33, Dad and Mother decided that we kids should go sightseeing. So they put us all in the car and drove to Noank, Connecticut. That was an adventure. In addition to my brother and myself, we were living in an apartment, 2-apartment building. Mm-hmm. The people above us became great family friends. They had a daughter a couple of years older than I, and the son was about a year younger. And the folks decided to give Helen Kincaid, was the daughter's name, the opportunity to go with us. That amazed me every time I think about it now. Excuse me. But that was a back seat full of kids, and we went sightseeing the whole way. I'd never seen the ocean even. I guess none of the kids had. But we went by way of Washington, D.C. and New York City, where I remember going to the aquarium. That was an adventure for me. And having clam chowder for the first time when we got up into the New England area. I wasn't terribly impressed, but mother insisted that was the way they made it up there. It was too watery to suit me, but eventually we got to Noank, a little tiny fishing village, right hanging on the edge of the thing, and it's still there. In later years, my wife and I drove up there. She hadn't traveled nearly as much as I had after the sojourn with the Army. So we tried to take both of us to the most of this country that we could get to in the time, other constraints that we had. So we actually went back to visit Noank in later years, and I found the house that I had enjoyed visiting in when I was a 12-year-old kid.
Wow.
But not too much different around there. It was still a little village hanging on the edge of the water. I'm talking about one narrow street that wound around literally the water's edge. They had a seawall, so you could jump down off the thing easily and into the
Right into the ocean.
tide-affected water. And they had a lot of shellfish that they caught and shelled around there, so you didn't do a whole lot of walking on the bottom of the water. The shells were sharp, and it helped me learn to swim because I didn't want to touch the bottom. So
That's one way to learn.
yeah.
Now, you grew up during the Great Depression.
Hmm?
You grew up during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit about that? Did your family experience any hardships during that time? Do you remember?
We just didn't have much of anything in the way of frills. We had everything we needed. We certainly got enough to eat. When we got to Middlesboro, it was so depressed that mother used to send extra sandwiches or lunches with me to school to pass along to kids that were coming to school that had nothing. And so by comparison, we were rich in that measure. Kids did for themselves, kids being the bunch that I ran with in school, all the way up through high school. Uh, Parties, dances, everything was, looking back, it was a great life.
Yeah.
Uh,
And looking back, do you remember any instances that made you realize how bad the depression was? I mean, compared to, I guess, to today or recent history in comparison.
It was all so general that we didn't dwell on it, as I remember it. We had rich members of the community, but in fact, one of my best friends when I was in high school, first part of it, and grammar school, was the son of the head of the coal company. So they had more than anybody else that we knew, servants and so on, but it didn't affect. Their name was Rhodes. Clifford was my friend, and he was as common as the rest of us. But we just didn't think about it at the time as when we were considering our friends.
Mm-hmm.
There was another one, same. That family had an overall factory. It was a well-known overall manufacturer. I can't remember its name. I didn't like overalls, so I never wore them. But Bluebell, they somewhere they were connected with a Bluebell outfit. But there was a son from that family who was not as closely a part of the kids group as the rest of us as we grew up, but they went to school with us to a certain point. Then they, with very few exceptions, they were sent off to boarding school of some kind. And the closest friend, Rhodes, Clifford, was sent to a military school from which he graduated. Very poor timing. As a first lieutenant, went right into the infantry and was shot two or three times. In each time he got hit in the legs, but then eventually, I guess he got tired of being shot. The military kept him in there. He ended up with a full colonel. Mm-hmm. But he went into a little university in Georgia. And again, my wife and I, traipsing around, located him for sure, and went down and visited him and his wife. And we only got to see him or them once, we came on back out here, and I was not too long after we visited. We got word from his wife that Clifford had a massive heart attack and did him in.
Yeah.
And I lost track of her. She made it clear by her lack of response that she apparently wasn't interested in continuing the long distance contact. So
Now, what were some of the things that you and your friends would do for fun growing up?
bicycles, we all had bicycles. We had skates. We didn't know what an ice skate was, or rollerblades or things like that. I'm talking about a four-wheel skate that you clamped on your shoes. But I definitely remember using them when the weather was right. Our little town of Middlesboro was equipped with well laid out streets and sidewalks and so forth that were paved. So, and the whole thing was up and down. It's right in the mountain, edge of the mountains, Cumberland Mountains. And while on the locating subject, it's Middlesboro is right below Cumberland Gap, through which history tells us that everybody traveled when they were moving from the east to the west. And there actually was a tree that we used to be able to find that had Daniel Boone's carved initials in it. Of course, I don't know how accurately that was identified, but we claimed it. But the Cumberland Gap was the pass through which you moved back and forth, and we had friends in, well, first I should locate Middlesboro as being 3 miles from the Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia state lines. So we were constantly in and out of all 3 states. And we had friends in all 3 states. 2 of them my friends lived in Cumberland Gap, a little village, and they each went in the military. One had sense enough to take the government training and came out with eventually with a PhD. A doctorate, a get well type doctor. The other one, like me, went in the Air Corps, and he was a bombardier on a B-17. And he found me in England. Their B-17, for some reason, landed at our little base, and he saw my name on the roster in the control tower as having flown that day on some kind of a mission. So he started looking, and I've had a call from the headquarters telling me that this Ben Odell was there looking for me. So, of coincidences is happen fairly often. I walked into the mess hall one day from there. Old Buckingham is the name of the field where we flew from, and sat down at one of the tables, and directly across from me was a man that I had gone to school with there in Middlesboro. How coincident, you say it,
Coincidence.
can happen that easily beyond me, but there he was.
Yeah.
Colgan was his family name, and he was old, a little older than I, but not much.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't last too long in there. He made it home, if I remember correctly. I know but he was a co-pilot on a B-24, and for some reason they had a engine failure or something on takeoff. They ended up, he bailed out of the thing, but it was way too low, and he ended up almost at full speed going into a tree. He broke his arm and various other problems, and he called me, or had them call me to ask me to call his home here, that is in Middlesboro,
Mm-hmm.
to tell him what had happened. He didn't want to rely on shaky information getting to his family from somebody that didn't know him.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, life just goes on with oddball connections like that,
Mm-hmm.
here and there. So
So, what was some of your favorite music growing up? Was there any particular artists or songs that?
music,
Mm-hmm.
well, we grew up in the dance band era, big name band, and many of them came through Middlesboro and performed. We had a pavilion or dance hall, or whatever you want to call it, in a park outside of town proper, and a number of the name traveling bands. My memory is so poor now, I can't come up with the names of anything when I want to, but Miller, um,
That's
they
okay.
just, the names in that era, and there were many of them, and several of them did perform for us to dance to out at the little park. And we had most of the fields when we were in England had name band, dance band performers visit the fields.
Mm-hmm.
I never did get to have that happen to me. I don't know how they managed to miss me, but they worked hard at it. But people like Hope and Crosby and big name, but they traveled all around.
Mm-hmm.
um, on the when we could get a pass, we were located about 100, a little over 100 miles from London. So when we could get a pass of any length, 3-day on up, we usually headed for London. And they had Red Cross sponsored hotels around London that we usually used if we could get in. And they had good entertainment places that were acceptable. That's quite a few of them weren't, but you could weed them out. Of course, they didn't have all that much to work with, because you go into London where a great part of it, downtown, was bombed out. They cleaned it up, but as quickly as they could, which was pretty quick. But they, what was left was nothing left.
Yeah.
Just a beat up town.
And did you have any jobs as a teenager growing up? Did you have any?
Yes, I did whatever I could that would offer a little bit of money. I managed to meet the brother of a young man that had his own electrical and refrigeration shop there in town. And this man that I had met, I don't remember where I met him or how, but he was all set to try to get on with the rural electrification organization. The government was just trying to get started. Those initials of that thing became pretty well known before they got through with it. I had demonstrated somehow along the line that I could tell which wires not to touch if you're fiddling with electricity. And that's what they were planning to do, was run wiring in the rural parts of the country, all over. And anyhow, I met the brother that had the shop there in town, Elton Cluxton. With my memory, as poor as it is, how can I come up with a name like that? But he and his wife had this shop. She answered the phone, took care of the paperwork, and he hired me to work in the back room, bench, and had the rural electrification thing come through there the way the one man was hoping it would. I was supposed to go with him, traveling around, running wires to houses or whatever. But that didn't come to pass for me. But I did get work with the shop, learn a little bit about refrigeration and how dirty and heavy and so on it is, and had money, a little money.
How old were you at the time?
Somewhere between 14 and 18, I guess.
And you remember how much money you were making? What your wage was?
No, less than $1 an hour, and I don't think I was paid by the hour there. Because the shop definitely wasn't making all that much money to hand around. When I finished high school, I went for 1 year over to a little university, Lincoln Memorial University, which was about 13, 14 miles into Tennessee from Middlesboro. And it was obviously not, in my mind, what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to a better school, better college. But in the meantime, I needed to work, live, eat, whatever. And we were just on the edge of getting in the war. Manufacturing was moving in that direction. And down, there was an Alcoa manufacturing thing at, Alcoa, Tennessee is a little town that housed this thing, and they were expanding the actual plant and take an exam. They could figure out where you might be able to be used. The electrical department was the most desirable wage-wise, and my scoring on the test let me go into the electrical department. And I worked hard electrical labor, putting up this plant, running conduit and so forth to run the wires in. But they got that finished and running, and then they gave me the opportunity to switch to the pyrometric department, which was a lot easier work, but still working. And by then they were pulling people out of industry to go in the service. And they had given me a deferral classification. I don't remember now what they call them. But if you wanted to hang on to the job, you could keep out of the service for a while at least. But I decided that I wanted to go ahead and join the fray, so I went over to Knoxville and took the necessary exams to get in, sign up with the Army, and I was trying to get into the flying end of it, and they had a cadet program that I expected to go in. At that time, you sign up for it, and of course you've been tested along the line to be sure they could take you further down the line. And their routine had been to sign up people that they could take on into the cadet program and to let them hang out for usually about 6 months before they actually called them. And this was known to those of us affected by it. But they made a big exception just as soon as I got in. Political shenanigans I found out since I got through with it all. But the different military departments were all vying for the same pool of bodies. So the Army decided they would hide some of them here and there by starting this program, which they started with me. And that's exaggerated a little bit, but what they had come up with was, in our case, was called a college training detachment. So I was working there in Alcoa still, and I had a call from my parents in Middlesbrough. You'd have to have a map in front of you to see how entwined this is. Middlesbrough is about roughly 60 miles from Knoxville, Tennessee. Knoxville was about 20 miles, I guess, from Alcoa. And so anyhow, I had a telephone call from my dad. And I called him back, and he said, "You need to get home. You got a telegram here from the military telling you to report to Cincinnati or to what was a fort right across the river, Fort Thomas, I believe it is, right across from Cincinnati." But I only had about a week, not months, to get up there and be sworn in. I'd been sworn in when I signed up initially, but we went through all of that again, and they handed out what clothing they had available. It wasn't all that great, and then they put us on a roster and on ancient trains and sent us down to Biloxi, Mississippi. And there we were dumped out it was a field, an existing military base. Names just don't come back. So we learned to march, hut 2, 3, and not a whole lot else. We calisthenics like crazy, and the facilities were not all that great. This was in the winter, or, well, it was still winter. Temperature didn't get all that frigid down there, but when you are taking a shower out of doors, that's where our showers were. We had duck boards on the floor, and there were times when we had ice on the duck board. So the facilities, as I said, weren't all that exciting. But anyhow, one day, the routine was to take us out into the field for calisthenics, and the conductor of the calisthenics would be up on a platform, and sometime before we got through with the whole thing that day, they would stop and call roll. There were a lot of people, hundreds, and they had on a clipboard, and my name was the first one on this one page, and we were Mac this and Mac that, and down the line, and into other M's eventually, but one, they always ended their roll call by asking if there was anybody there that they had not called. And this one day, a few of us held our hands up, so he went back to his clipboard and found out that he had missed my whole page. I was the first one on the page. So we were duly signed off and went back to the barracks or whatever. Next day, the routine started over just as usual, with the one exception. When they said, okay, through the calisthenics, following name men, when I call your name, will fall out. And they pointed to a spot over a little ways. And so the rest of us got comfortable, expecting it to be the same routine. But the first name they called was mine. He had not put the pages back in order. Mm-hmm. They just left the Macs on the front, so there were 30 some of us, out of us, and I was the first name on the list. Put us back on the ramshackly trains and sent us up to fairly far up in Ohio. Remember, it's still winter. We got off the plane, it was below zero, several degrees. Several of the guys ended up hospitalized. They caught so much tough. We just weren't used to the whole thing. Well, we stayed there for about, I think, 3 months in the college training detachment. Mm-hmm. They sent us, this was a little school, Mount Union College. And I think it still exists, but it was primarily a seminary teaching. They had co-ed, they had women. That was fun. We were the handful of males and a whole little college of female. But we went to prescribed classes because we had come from all walks of life. This was going on all over the country. Coincidentally, I came out here, got married eventually, and ended up with a brother-in-law who had gone through the same rigmarole. He was a navigator, though. Your classification, I'll pat myself on the back, the pilot was the most sought, usually, and required a little bit higher, whatever, I don't know, math, or I certainly didn't excel in math, but something made it possible to get pilot training. The next one down the list was navigator, and then the bombardier. And the higher scoring list could be any one of the three, depending on what they needed. But if they needed pilots, if you had scored only enough to be a navigator or bombardier, you couldn't go on to be trained as a pilot. That was the way they very loosely bred it down. Anyhow, we stayed around there for about 3 months. Then they shipped us back down to Texas, San Antonio, for classification again. And we stayed there for a little while, and depending on how you were classified and the next direction you had to go, we went for pre-flight and then basic flight training, then 3 levels from there: primary, basic, and advanced. And from advanced you were commissioned and sent into the wild world. And I had asked for multi-engine training, and they took me with open arms. That's what they wanted at that time. So I went back after a short leave and went back to Fort Worth for B-24 training. And got out of there again, probably about 3 months. Then we went up to, well, first to Lincoln, Nebraska, I think it was, where I got my assigned crew. There were 10 of us total on 24. And then we went on from there we went to Boise, Idaho for combat training, they call it, where we learned to recognize our crew members. And there were four officers and 6 enlisted men. And learned to work together and fly together to other planes.
Now I'd like to, I guess, rewind a little bit, kind of talk about, I guess, the days leading up to Pearl Harbor, and then the actual attack. Do you recall sort of the start of the war in Europe and in Asia before the U.S. got involved? And do you remember those days?
Only by radio and newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was working at Alcoa when Pearl Harbor was bombed. I know exactly where I was. I was driving back south to Alcoa.
Mm-hmm.
Sunday afternoon. Beautiful day. Sun shining, and but that was I had, of course, we all knew that things were changing, not for the better, but the development of Hitler's forces, and then when the Japanese got into it on at Pearl Harbor, those of us that were still out of the thing, knew that we were headed into the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
So until I said I went ahead and volunteered, I went through that.
Yeah.
It had not really affected me, except that I was working more and more in war production. We started working longer hours and more days a week. We were working quite a long time before I actually had signed up.
Mm-hmm.
We were working at least 6 days a week. So the war effort was affecting us, but not directly.
So did you knew that eventually you would be called to serve?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about your training when actually getting in the plane and your first flight and those experiences?
That was exciting. In an effort to make it less traumatic than it might have been otherwise, they had, where were we? In that college training detachment thing. They had a little field outside of town, and they took us out there, proper number at a time, and we flew in Piper Cubs or planes of that size. We handled the controls and the whole bit, but we weren't allowed to solo.
Mm-hmm.
But they were making an effort to go back down that far behind. Before that, you went into the cadet program, you went from the classification center to primary flight training, and then we eventually did the same thing. Mm-hmm. So when I first stepped into a primary trainer, and that was a P-17, a low-wing monoplane, open cockpit, two of them. And your pilot, your trainer, instructor sat in the rear and spoke through a pitot tube. didn't like, it's a stick control. And if you were not doing, depending on the instructor, you had all kinds of different type. And mine, as I remember him, was good. Boynton. I can't remember my own name, but I can come up with these things that far back. But some of them, I was told, I never had Boynton pull it on me, but if the student was sitting up there in the front cockpit, and you got a stick for both of them, and if you got out of line according to the instructor, he could overpower you with that thing and wheel the stick around, wrapping you on the knees or whatever he could get to. But that was not the norm. The first time up, as I said, was pretty exciting, but we were on a grass field. It was not terribly exciting from the standpoint of speed,
Yeah.
but we went bumping along, fixed gear, so you got off the ground with your wheels still down, and they stayed down. They weren't retractable. And you had your instructor with you every flight until he was convinced that you knew how to get the thing up and down without him. Now that was a memorable moment for me, because I didn't think I was ready. I just wasn't thinking that way.
Yeah.
When we landed, and instead of having me taxi over to the parking area, Boynton got out of the plane himself and said, "Okay, take it around." Those were his words. You're supposed to take off again and around the traffic. And I did, as did a few others of us, like gazillions. But that, trying to remember all the things I've been taught, and am I doing it right, and am I doing everything safely, and all that stuff becomes second nature eventually. But that first solo flight was an experience that I do remember. And I don't remember how many hours I had, not all that many, but when I soloed. So then we went on to learn different maneuvers and so on,
Yeah.
to perfect the whole thing.
Now, did you have any close calls or near accidents at all?
No, none that I in the single engine planes, I never did have any problem. The more engines you tack onto the thing, it's like anything else. A law of probabilities, you got more, then there's more chance you're going to lose some of them, or something more to go wrong. But by now I'm thinking crew, we were pretty fortunate, very fortunate all the way through. We flew 32 missions, which is a bunch of missions when it at the period of the war that we were still flying. They started flying in the 8th Air Force out of England. And they started that with 15 mission, no, not that many, not that few, maybe 20, then it went to 25, and then up to 30.
It kept up.
And somewhere in there, we were flying for 30, and they moved it on to 35. That was toward the end of the war. So we flew 30 or 31 missions with the 452nd Squadron, 453rd Group. Then they decided that the end of the war was in sight, and they didn't need as many of us as they had. The B-24 was enough like the B-29 in configuration and so on, that I think that was the word that we got. They decided that they would send a bunch of the 24 pilots from Europe or the 8th Air Force back here for retraining to go on to the Pacific as B-29 pilots. At the beginning of the B-29 use, they were being trained over there in the Pacific, but not, I guess, not fast enough. Anyhow, the government doesn't do anything real fast, so they took us off flight operation or war operation, our group, and first came out with the decision that they would take all the crews with 15 missions or fewer. They abruptly changed from what they first announced. We had 30 missions already. Mm-hmm. Oh, we first thought we were going to come home from this thing, so it must have been a fairly high number. We're going to come back to the States, and the lower number we're going to go on flying combat. Mm-hmm. But then they did an abrupt change, and if you had 15 missions or fewer, they brought them back to the States. The rest of us, they spread around the whole 2nd Air Division, which was all B-24s. And that was us. So we fell into that. And eventually we did transfer to another group, the 4 something or other, 446, I believe. And we went through all of that rigmarole, had to pack everything up and move. They were over closer to Norwich, but got signed in, and I remember very distinctly that we met as a crew with some part of that new, different group. And they were asking us, trying to figure out where to put us, is what it amounted to. And high on the list of things they asked was how many missions we'd flown, and we answered, and they looked at their own records and kind of smugly smiled. That makes you the oldest crew in this group. So they were trying to find out whether they were going to have to train us more. All we had to do was be taught how they divided the thing up in the air, and we went on. We flew, I thought we flew 2 more missions with that group. My bombardier was keeping a record, which he wasn't supposed to do. And he said, this is after the war, but he still claimed that we just flew 31. But we were still attached to that group at the end of the war there, and that was the end of practically the end of the flying. But,
so going back to, I guess, when you left the U.S., when you were deployed to Europe, can you talk about those days? How what you were feeling at that point? Your training was over, and
we were disappointed in that at the time we actually were all equipped and so forth to go into combat. They didn't have any planes here for us to take. That had been the routine. They put crews, available crews, at different fields around here in the country, this country. We had been sent to Kansas. My memory's going again. Anyhow, when we got there, I had a wire waiting for me, telling me that my armor, my engineer, gunner, was still in a hospital in New York where he had gone for leave. He went home for leave, but while he was there, he got sick, and they ended up with him in the hospital. So we had to Topeka, Kansas. We had to lay around there in Topeka for a long time, a lot of days, waiting for them to find a replacement engineer for me and get him to us. So as a result of all of that, we didn't get to fly into Europe. We went by ocean. We did have the largest ocean liner that this country had at the time, and I don't remember its designation. It's SS something or other. But she was bigger than the Queen Mary. Anyhow, there were 4 heavy bomber crews put on that ship, along with, I think, at least 5 general hospitals. That's a lot of people. So our contingent was 40 bodies. That is, we had 10 members on the crew, and there were 4 crews. So we were Air Corps. They had a 100-man group of combat engineers. They had 1 officer ranked high enough that he was in charge of the engineers. He must have had a few extra, but lower ranking. The rest of them were hospital people. The nurses were all lieutenants. The doctors might be anywhere up the line. We were the low men on the totem pole. So they put us on this very nice ship, but it was at most of the time when they sent ships out at that time of the war, they had protection of some kind, but this liner was fast enough they they figured it could do an evasive maneuvering on the way over to avoid the U-boats. We had a blimp that went with us as far as it could. That was, I think, 2 days. Then it had to go back. But we made it across in something like 5 days. Not bad. Accommodations were far from plush. The bunks were so close together, you literally, if some of them, you had to get permission to turn over. But for the most part, it was reasonably easy. We only had a couple of meals a day. There were so many people that they just couldn't run that any more than that through. One short period, we had a little inclement weather. The swells started building and miraculously cut the length of the mess line. That was great. we didn't have to stand in line forever to get our food. And we landed in Liverpool, went by train over to where we were going to end up, and we ended up in Old Buckingham.
Mm-hmm.
But the other 3 crews went different places, not with us.
And how did you feel when you stepped foot on European soil for the first time?
Kind of overwhelmed. We were, for the most part, all about the same origin.
And how old were you at this point?
20,
About
20, yeah. Just barely 20. And I was probably more widely traveled than a large percentage of them. And I hadn't done all that much. We were just, the country was at war, and they were doing what they felt had to be done to get us out of it.
Yeah.
A lot of us voluntarily joined the thing. Others were drafted, but managed to get into the same training that had to be done to get into air defense. But
Let's see here. So, what were you doing preparing for your first mission from the point where you arrived in England and then?
we had orientation flights. That's about the only thing I can remember. Um, a gazillion of us clumped into the boot of England, of the island. So fields are close together, small fields have just been carved out of the flatland. And pretty easy to get confused from the air. I don't know how we've kept from running over each other or landing almost every other flight on somebody else's field. But we seemed to manage most of the time to avoid it. But I flew we flew a few training missions for those purposes, for orientation, and then we flew one preliminary, it had to have been, because I only flew missions, accountable missions, with my own crew. But I know there was a pilot because he was from another plane, but in the same hut, Nissen hut, that we were in. And he was assigned to fly with me from the briefing right on to boarding the planes, starting engines, assembling the whole thing. But he was with me to be sure that I was aware of what I was supposed to be doing. And I was very happy to have him there because you've got hundreds of planes in the air, and they all have to be in about the same area. And had to do it, end up assembling into a formation that has been pre-decided so that the people who have to explain how well or poorly that bomb run turned out to be had to have some control over it. So but that's one flight that we actually went up probably 20. We usually formed over England when we could. We did. Weather caused a lot of bad formation problems. We'd have to actually go above 20,000 feet to get above the clouds many times. Other times, regularly, they would get the formation pretty well underway at lower elevation, and then continue climbing as we flew over the channel, so that by the time we reached France or the continent, we would be, hopefully, we would be at an altitude that was above the easy defense.
Yeah.
But anyhow, the one flight we had, I had an advisor with me,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that we just sat through the briefing and
Yeah.
took what notes we needed and felt we needed for reference, and went onto the plane, got dressed properly and got in, and then flew the assembly formation, whatever it was, and at 10,000 feet we went on oxygen in the plane.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we weren't pressurized, we were oxygen masks. And eventually, it didn't take too long, my co-pilot was a heck of a nice guy, and hated the B-24 with a passion. He wanted one of those that wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Mm.
That was his temperament. That was all that he had planned on. But when they graduated him from advanced flight training, he was a fighter pilot in his mind, and that's all the training. I got him, and I had to train him on a B-24, and I'm not the only one that had this happen. When they were, well, the heavy bombers were the ones they were knocking down the fastest in the beginning. And that's how the number of missions prior to being sent home gradually went up, because as the as the Luftwaffe or the German Air Force slowly were knocked down, then we had more planes in the air we could keep in the air, and so they very slowly raised the number of missions that any particular crew had to fly before it could be relieved some. And they didn't have the planes, so they had to keep them in the air longer as fast as they could. But I ended up on what they call a milk run. My first combat mission was to a relatively insignificant target. So it was not defended all that heavily with anti-aircraft or fighter defense. Hence the milk run name. That was supposed to make it sound easier. It was. But as I said, we got the experience of flying alone as a group, as a crew, and the same formation building that you would have for a milk run that you would have for going to Berlin or someplace. So it all worked out for us pretty well. But
Now, were the formations, would they change depending on the mission? Or would
yeah.
they?
The basic formation didn't change. We had let's see, 9 planes in a formation, and on a maximum effort there'd be probably 12, but those formations had to be pretty much the same. You got a 3-plane lead, 3-plane right wing, 3-plane left wing. There's your 9-plane. 12 planes, they put a 3-plane down below the lead plane. But and then they could put as many of those, but that became pretty much the most manageable formation that they came up with. One lead plane with one secondary group lead. And then they found fairly early in their thing that they only needed one bomb site. A lot of us carried them, but we didn't bomb with them. The same lead plane that took the whole thing in had the bombardier that at the proper time picked up the target.
Yeah.
Visually, we hoped, that's from the standpoint of getting it over with. If we had cloud cover over the target and we still went to the target on radar, the defense was less accurate. But more often than not, if the cloud cover materialized, we just abandoned that target and went to a secondary, which had already been prepared for. We had it on our sheet, so. And if the whole thing was virtually out of the question, they scrubbed the mission. We might have flown for 3 hours, but we still scrubbed the mission rather than risk all of that over the target and waste.
Now, what type of targets did you guys have, and where were they?
Almost all industry and railroad. There were exceptions, but don't think of anything outstandingly different. We would bomb occasionally. Would go to a dam. They found early on that those are difficult. So they developed special bombing techniques for that. So just the general 8th Air Force didn't do that. Submarine pens, airfields. We actually bombed airfields. That was not a very practical or logical target for heavy bombers. That was what we were, because the most destructive way to attack an airfield is low down strafing and small scatter bombs and that sort of thing. But I have a list of our targets, but it wouldn't tell you a whole lot more than what you already know, unless you had the map in front of you and knew what we were talking about. The Ruhr Valley had industry big time, and it was heavily defended. And from a living through it standpoint, we dreaded the Ruhr Valley because we were in heavy defensive fight from the very beginning. The anti-aircraft was pretty solid.
Did you guys encounter that frequently?
Almost every flight.
Yeah.
But not as heavily as if we were going to primarily rail yard. They wouldn't be defended as heavily as the heavy industry, just by number of anti-aircraft batteries firing up at you.
Did your plane ever get hit with any the flak?
Almost every flight.
Yeah.
We would have some damage. A hole here and there. Doesn't take much to punch through an aluminum skin thing. Major damage, lose an engine or something like that, fairly often you would have that. We, didn't keep count, but you lose an engine, you can't keep up with the main thing. I did that on at least a couple of times. We were still climbing as a formation and would have an engine stop because of mechanical failure. I I can fairly vividly remember having that happen one time when I was still climbing, and feather one engine, the other three can't keep up with the rest of the formation without burning themselves up after a while. So in the position that I was in, that I described, was still going in and up. I just didn't think it was worthwhile, so I turned around and go back alone. That's all of that had to be figured into your thinking. In that particular case that I'm thinking about, we were still over France, but it was pretty much occupied by our forces. So I didn't feel that I was sticking our neck out too far, because German aircraft weren't then coming that far back to catch it before we got in. They had been at other earlier times, but if you lost an engine due to German defense aircraft, then you got to do what you were forced to do. You've lost an engine. You still don't have the keep up ability. So you do what you have to as far as applying extra power to what's left, to the point of destruction. But it's just like everything in life, it's a matter of making decision. They were not supposed to break formation for any reason that except inability to keep going. In other words, if we were on our way home, we'll say, many times somebody would drop out of formation because they couldn't keep up. But we weren't supposed to drop out of our formation to try to help that one. Our whole success or failure depended on that formation that we were so drastically trying to keep up with. Because the defense of the whole thing depended on all of the planes, not just one. Well,
Now the targets that you guys had, which countries were they located in? Do you remember?
France, in the very beginning of our time, would be we went to a few in France. Most all of them were in Germany. Toward the very end of the war, our part of it, we actually bombed, I think we bombed something that was over the line in Czechoslovakia. I may be wrong in my memory. I know toward the end of it, we were given pamphlets with little translation expressions written in Russian and some of the other countries over there, not just in German or French, but that was because we were going so far in. It made more sense if something happened that we couldn't keep up. We were going to have to land someplace. It made more sense to go shorter distance straight ahead than it did to try to go back all the way across the continent. But Berlin was one of the furthest east, most heavily defended targets that we've hit more than once. I can't keep them organized in my mind or my memory.
Yeah. And what's going through your head as you're flying towards your target and you start experiencing the anti-aircraft fire and you know you're getting hit?
Fear, I suppose you could call it. It's apprehension. Mm-hmm. You're flying along. Everything around you is in good shape until you get close enough to one of the anti-aircraft batteries that they start firing and having them explode close enough to you that you're looking at the bursts. Yeah. Then you know that if one of those happens to be close enough to you, it's going to do damage. But we had it happen not to us, but to planes flying with us. And it's unsettling, that's for sure. Having the anti-aircraft bursts close enough that you can hear them, for me it was unsettling enough because I got 4 engines grinding away out there with helmet and earphones, all this stuff muffling the outside sound. But if the explosion of those bombs or shells are close enough that you can hear them and you can actually feel it, that's too close. That can be doing major damage to the plane as well as the people in the plane. So that's a different level of apprehension.
Yeah. Did anybody in your crew ever get hit, or was it just the?
No. We had one time, kind of covers all of this stuff. We had a shell that exploded right outside the right side of the thing, knocked out the plexiglass on that windshield, and a piece of the shrapnel came in and actually hit some of my co-pilot's apparatus was, what was his oxygen tubing, or anyhow, he ended up in dead silence. I thought he was done in. So when I got over the realization that we were still flying, I remember distinctly reaching over and grabbing what I could get a hold of, and got his attention and indicated that I couldn't talk to him or fix it so he could talk to me. And he did. Got on oxygen, back on oxygen first, and neither of us, well, we both were peppered with plexiglass shards, but we never had any direct hit from the shell. But that was the closest. We had damage to the plane, holes and that sort of thing. But one of our last missions that we flew was to Berlin, and it was very heavily defended. So the maneuver that we used over when we dropped our bombs, still formation, but they got off the target as fast as they could, so they were what we call racked it over. So we racked over to get off the target, and when we got back to the base, we had discovered, so the B-24 has two vertical tail fins.
Mm-hmm.
We had, well, we were going over, so we had to be laying over, and we'd taken a shell up through the vertical fin on that side, on the left. But it didn't explode. It just went through. There's a hole like that up through the thing. And most of the shell of the holes in the plane were just pieces of shrapnel that went through, and very little damage, or, well, could leave a hole that was going to take it out of the plane out of commission for long enough for them to patch it,
Yeah.
which was what they had to keep up with all the time. That's why they were always short of available planes. They were busy patching. But some of them came back. I just couldn't believe that the plane had been able to fly. They had so much damage, but fortunately, we didn't end up with any of that much damage. That, what I just described, was the closest to it, because if thing had exploded, it would have knocked the tail off, and that would have been the end of it. Unless we could fight a way out. Not too many of them could do that. When the plane started down, it went into excuse me, I'm getting hoarse. The centrifugal force makes it almost impossible for anybody to move around in the thing in an attempt to get out. But we were very, very lucky. We didn't lose anybody. No one was badly hurt. And we flew home when we, at the end of the war, they put the mechanics all hard at work and gathered up all the planes they had and all of the good engines they had and put them together and decided that these could make it back from England to Labrador or to this country. And that's what we did.
Now, do you know the shells, the anti-aircraft shells? Would they detonate on a timer or a certain altitude, or what? Do you know how those
Timer.
Timer.
For the most part, it's done at the guns.
Yeah.
They set them up to explode. I mean, they know pretty accurately what elevation you're.
So they kind of know where
So
to
they
set it at.
set them for that elevation.
Now, did you ever encounter any of the Luftwaffe while you were on any of your missions, or?
Oh yeah, we were attacked. In fact, we were attacked by the jets. That was kind of an attention-getting thing too. They developed an undulating thing. We flew our bomber streams. You've heard that expression. And that's what we were in, as just a continuous stream of B-24s or 17s. We were all in the air, same time, all heading essentially the same place. So toward the end of the air hostilities, Germany had developed the 262. Me-262 was one of their first jets, and it could outfly anything we had. We just didn't have anything that could touch it in speed, but it didn't have any endurance. So they had to develop special techniques that they used to take advantage of their speed, but over or to correct for their lack of time or speed, time or distance. Our people had, as soon as the jets showed up in the air, our fighter pilots figured out what I just got through saying. The jets would come up, hit our bomber stream, but then it would have to break off fairly quickly because it was going to run out of fuel, just less than an hour time. And a good part of that is in finding us and hitting. So our people figured that out quickly, and so they get 3 or 4 of them, of our planes. They can't keep up with the MEs in speed, but they know they're going to have to break off combat and go down pretty soon, very soon. So our fighters would put 2 or 3 or whatever they could happen to get on the guy and would follow him. We'd keep one on either side, one above and below, if they could get that many involved. So the German fighter has to change direction sometime. If he turns left, turns right, our people can then have a chance to shoot at him. Because the German has to be slowing down. He hadn't got any more push.
Yeah.
So if the well, not Goring, I guess it was Goring, the head of the German Air Force. Anyhow, he was the one that goofed by not putting all of their effort into production of jets. They had the know-how, they had the proven engines. They just didn't have enough of them because we didn't have anything to compete with them except mass. But they first figured out, that's what I started to talk about, using essentially the same idea on our bomber stream. They would come up from their field waiting until they were pretty positive where we were going, which they could do every time we went up. So they put enough of these jets in the air that they could come in under us and go down our bomber stream in an undulating movement like that. They'd come up firing into, then they'd break away for to get away, and then come back up again. And they could only do that two or three times, and then they were out of range and out of fuel and out of everything else. But in the meantime, we were out of a lot of planes because they would be firing down this mass of B-24s or B-17s with, I don't remember now what their cannon amounted to. I've been given scads of books on all of this stuff, but it doesn't really do all that. Hindsighting it. But they attacked us individually too. And it was a difficult thing to defend. There was a gunner in a plane flying on my right wing. I know this because it was an award was given to him for having at least been part of the destruction of a German jet that attacked the formation, just one plane.
So you guys had fighter pilots escorting you more or less when you'd go on the mission?
If it was late enough in the war, we had P-51s that could fly that far. And of course it depended on where we'd been or were going. The 51 was always a good fighter, very good fighter. But until they put wing tanks, wing tip tanks, disposable, droppable, then they could go far enough to stay with us. But before then, they couldn't. So we'd have to, with tears in our eyes, wave goodbye to them when they started getting to the end of their range.
Yeah.
But
So they added additional fuel tanks to the wings that they'd be able to dispose of after they use.
yeah, they hung on the out toward the end of the wing tips or wing ending tips, right?
And they drop them off to reduce the weight.
If they wanted to needed to become maneuverable, as in combat, they drop them.
Got it.
That we found out the hard way was kind of dangerous too, because if they happened to be above our bomber line, we had wing tanks raining down. Where did I put that thing?
It's always something, right?
That one is trying to sell me an emergency thing.
Yeah.
If I fall, I can yell for them, and they'll get out the checkbook.
Mm-hmm. Always trying to sell you something. So you're talking about the P-51s with the tanks and become dangerous. So, how frequently would you say, on a mission you guys would go back? Or you said you go out with 9 planes per formation, but how frequently would planes get lost?
You mean from
From either your formation
opposition?
Or the groups no, from
They just lost.
they either got shot down or
Well, very frequently, depending on the target.
Yeah.
The Air Force attrition figures were astounding as compared with, well, even Marine ground forces on Guadalcanal, some of those islands over there where they took such horrible losses, but ours were always higher. But it wasn't, it didn't get the attention because it happened every time we went out.
Yeah.
To some extent, you got 9 to 10 people on every plane.
Yeah.
So you lose 3 or 4 planes out of one formation, but then you got umpteen formations up there, all of those same numbers. Then that's every day that the weather allowed us to fly during that winter, especially the winter of 44, 43 was when they were beginning. And their attrition then was horrible. But then we got more planes over there and in the air, and more planes being built here. So we were building, getting ahead of it, you might say, in development that way, but still in numbers you can't get beyond the fact that you got 9 to 10 people on every heavy bomber, and every one you shoot down you've got the same 9 to 10 people lost.
Yeah.
A lot did able to get down safely with parachutes, but even that wasn't a sure thing because that was a terrible, terrible winter for everybody concerned. It was so cold in the winter, the Christmas area there, our bomb doors would freeze shut. We'd have to drop the bombs through the thing and let the thing hang out there, or the doors hang out there open. Poor guys in the back of the plane were like icicles. It was just a bitterly cold winter, and on the ground too. Everything was covered with snow and ice.
Now, if you encountered a situation where you couldn't fly the plane anymore, if you had sustained too much damage, what was the protocol as far as abandoning or
Well, if the pilot couldn't keep it in the air safely, then he just ordered the crew to bail out.
so that would have been your decision.
Mm-hmm.
And is it just sort of every man for themselves at that point? Or is there
Once the decision is made to abandon, yes, you have to. The pilot, co-pilot, wore backpacks, chutes. We didn't fly with a belly turret. They decided against that. Actually, just before we got over there, they had started taking them out, which was a great relief to the gunners that had to get in them. But I was talking about parachutes. Most of the gunners wore parachute harness with ring on the thing, and then the parachute had a hook, so the gunners had their hands free, so they kept their chutes laying somewhere within reach. So if anything happened, that they were told to bail out, rather than pick it up and put it on. It was that simple. Pilot, co-pilot is in a seated position. Of the chute pack wouldn't work for us, so we had the things on our back all the time. Somebody else had to do that. Maybe the nose gunner. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the only preparation that they had to make, was to put the chute on,
Yeah.
and then get out. They had in the back part of the plane, there was a trap door type of thing. They could pull it open and go down through the door. There was a door in the top of the plane, right behind the pilot, co-pilot, that could be open. That was it. Well, Bombay, of course,
Yeah.
could, but that didn't, wasn't real easy, because everything is scrunched. Have you ever gone out Lions hangar out here at Orange County Airport.
Is it at John Wayne? Or?
John Wayne, yeah.
I haven't, no. I'm gonna write it down though. Lions hangar, you said?
Yeah. He was a general in the Air Corps, and he had a beautiful hangar built, but to house, he has at least one B-17 they used to use to fly around. I'm not sure about his health anymore, but he used to fly around. Gale, again, was well acquainted with the young man that took care of the hangar and flew for a Lion when he wanted to fly around the country in his B-17 or one of his others. He had B-17s and 2 or 3 C-3s, or we call them C-54s, C-57. I'll get it right in a minute. C-47s, the old workhorse transport. The first airlines used them in their thing. They call them DC-3s. No, that's what we. Doesn't matter. They 2 twin-engine things, and they flew like forever. We used them in the war. They were troop carrying, glider pullers. They used them over the hump in India, over to Burma, China. How did I get on those DC-3s?
We were talking about the hangar.
At the, yeah, Lion. He used to have 2 or 3 of those, and the B-25s, and some German automobiles. It's quite an interesting thing, but periodically they have hoop-de-doo. Maybe one of the flying in thing. There's an outfit that has a 17 and a B-24, and generally have the B-25. They fly around the country, charging you money to
get rides and
even get on. Usually when they were out here, they charge a nominal fee to come into the hangar area, but then you wander all over and look and climb on and whatever. But it's a good opportunity to see up close. And
yeah, I'd love to go check it out.
I'll try to keep it in mind. trying to remember for sure whether I don't think they do it at Long Beach anymore. But I've gone out 2 or 3 times. Well, I wonder, they'll have some of these old planes parked out on the tarmac in front of the thing, and I let this happen without realizing at least once, to kind of ridiculous proportion. I was out there just wandering around looking at the old planes. That was one time when they had the 24 was out there. And I had been talking about it to one of my crowd, and people just there observing apparently heard me giving fairly knowledgeable answers, and the first thing I knew, I would have a whole audience, which is great. They wanted to know, and I should say, I do know Lion, or whoever's running the thing, usually will have a desk or table set inside the hangar. It's a big open door, and somebody will have someone there that's presumably can answer questions about what's going on. But at one time I kind of got sucked in on that out when I was just outside wandering around, and found it was kind of interesting how it happened. The congregation showed up,
Unexpectedly.
but that all depends on the number of people that they're getting to come in and look and all of that. But
Now let me ask you real quick, just so I can make sure that we have enough time for the portraits as well. What time do you have the meeting with your friend? What time do you have to be done?
I'm going to meet him at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So where we're having dinner is not far.
Okay. So if we go to like 5 o'clock or something, that would be okay with you, or?
No, if you have to go that long.
I don't anticipate we will. I want to make sure that I don't want to rush through anything either. But
no, I will probably only change shirts.
Okay.
I showered before I got dressed, so.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay. So going back to the plane that you flew, was it the same plane throughout for all the missions? Or?
No. They didn't have that many.
So you had to trade with.
We would take whatever was. They would get the number of planes decided upon for the mission they were going to have to put together. So I did fly the same plane more than once, but I was not assured of having the same plane, no. It all depended on availability.
Now, did you get to name any of the planes that you flew, or?
We didn't. We flew one that was fairly notable, the one that somebody else had named lace. She was quite well known because of the fairly scanty clothing. Let me see if I can find something. I've been getting stuff going on fairly recently. No. I'm going to have to quit talking before you want me to. As I said, my voice is petering out. Well, there's my crew. There's a much better. That's the B-24. If you have a clear I forgot what I'm looking for. Oh, here's a funny one. That's me. They early on in the training, they gave you that garb, and that was somewhere in Texas. And that was for home consumption. I'm sure you're supposed to send that back to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't look like that in combat. Now that's the list of the targets that we kept ourselves for ourselves. This was a type of briefing thing that we ended up with. We get one of these when we left the briefing. This was our group, 453rd.
Mm-hmm.
And these were times, English coast, Belgium, IP, so forth, and then coming back. And that one would have had us out for 7 hours. And they're called but I was something that you were asking about had triggered a memory of something that I thought I had gotten fairly recently, photographically speaking. Now we're getting into some of Mabe's dealings. He has taken, obviously took that picture and put this other stuff around it.
Oh, he put this together for you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
The plane the J was on the upright tail section,
Mm-hmm.
and well, that was it. The other, these were on our uniforms. I don't remember this one at all, but you ever hear of a V-mail?
Yeah, yeah.
Ever see a V-mail sheet?
Maybe once.
That one was not filled out. That's the way you
Oh, this is how you
came.
start.
This was my gunner crew. And somewhere in all of this mess, and this is only a fraction of it, Matt took, oh, here's the, you've already seen the one that was the original. And this is what Matt does to it.
Wow.
You saw the, wherever it went, the snap, yeah.
I think that might be a different
that's
one.
the gunners,
This was everybody in
right.
Lady Fluid.
Oh, I know, now I'm getting acclimated myself. They have made this museum. Oh, yeah. Jimmy Stewart, the movie actor,
Mm-hmm.
was in the Army. He enlisted just way back when I first started enlisting. And he worked his way up. He was a pilot when he enlisted, but he had his own plane. But not the Army type plane. But he worked his way up through the Air Corps, and pretty fast. And he was in charge of some of the group when they sent the 8th Air Force, the 453rd, the group, to England. The 8th Air Force was over there, but they sent the 453rd over, and Stewart went with that group. He was in the roughest of the rough and worked up through commanding the group. He was still there, not at the group when I was, but he used to come to our mission. I mean, our, what do you call those things I just talked about? We had them before each mission. They gathered and told us what to expect and handed out the times and all that.
Mm-hmm.
They were
Briefings.
briefing. That's the word. That's simple, but those are the things that get away from me. And it might do it again in 5 minutes or not for another 5 years. But anyhow, Stuart used to come to our briefings on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Had it happen more than once. But
So this is where your uniform was brought to.
That's where it's going to be.
Going to.
You know. I've got a picture someplace that Matt saw that I had to show that it was there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to cover too much stuff with, and you don't have enough background. But this is all from what Matt has brought back just this year.
Mm-hmm.
When he went back over there and for the dedication or whatever they call what they did to make that an official Second World War, no, an official .453rd
Mm-hmm.
organization. And they have fairly primitive stuff they put together. Somewhere in here there are pictures showing some of it. But it would be, will be better when they get it all done, more or less up to what they were hoping to make it. But they had the dedication this year. Matt tried to get me to go back, but I turned him down very completely because I just didn't feel like I could handle it physically.
Oh, so that's the original image then that he
Yeah,
had enlarged.
That's what he took
and
cleaned up and made that
wow.
from. Oh, those are. I kept up with all those guys through the years.
Are any of them around anymore? Do you know?
I've outlived them all.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Shame.
There's a note from Matt with some of the stuff that he's put together and sent me. And with my usual organizational techniques, I have no idea what any of it is. Don't even know what I'm opening. But well, these are pictures that the museum
Oh, that's what he was referring to in the letter.
Mm-hmm. Sent, because I didn't have any pictures like that. This is from, well, it tells you the date there.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that's what I was remembering. I knew that somebody had sent a picture out. That's
the plane you were referring
plane
to.
that I was talking about, but as I remember it, that's not the picture. It was that lace, you're not old enough to remember that. Um, well, they were in funny papers,
Ah, okay.
but yeah, these are snapshots that Matt has gotten from the museum.
Well, it's nice of him to send them to you.
But oh, I thought I was trying to get away from another picture. Those are on the scene snapshots of, those were planes that were when I was there.
Wow.
That part of that group.
You had to de-ice the planes during the wintertime?
Yes. But it wasn't, I don't remember it ever being to the point that it was funny. I didn't quite follow that snapshot.
That seems like an advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is this some sort of entertainment session happening there?
What? I don't have any, well, Santa visiting old Buckingham.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that. But I was there at that Christmas. I thought we were flying at that Christmas.
On Christmas Day?
Mm-hmm. But I think it was Matt that tried to convince me, or didn't agree with me completely, because he had come up with a different story that we were scheduled to go, but went another day or something like that.
Oh, okay.
But I'm almost certain that I had, had the briefing sheet that we got with the briefing on that Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, I'll wrap this portion up pretty quickly here. 'Cause I know you said your throat's getting a little sore. So when did you return from the war?
June, I don't know why I would remember it, but I think it was June 22nd. It would have been 1945. The war was over. VE Day. When was it? 44? No, it was 45. It'd have to be. Because this was all going in 44. It's Christmas of 44.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the first of the year after that would be 45. That's when the actual secession of the thing happened. And we were over there at that time.
Not in 46.
45.
Okay.
45. I'm pretty sure.
It was in May or in June?
No, it was in April or May. But they had to get us all disbanded, or everything had to be
Yeah.
wrapped up.
So you were back in the States while the war in the Pacific was still, I guess,
It was
occurring.
still going on. Actually, I was on a train coming out to Long Beach on VJ Day. Is that the right thing? When they
Surrendered.
surrendered Japan,
Yep.
I was being transferred at my request. I'd been transferred to um, the transport people. Oh yeah, we were in the 8th Air Force. While we had just gotten back, and I wanted to go on flying. I wanted to get into flying a C-54, which later was designated a DC-8. No, that's not right. Doesn't matter. It was the only 4-engine transport we had.
Mm-hmm.
The airlines were using it and things like that. But anyhow, to go on flying, getting into the C-54, I had to transfer to ATC, Air Transport Command. And to do that, they had to send me out here to a base that had the correct complement that would
Mm-hmm.
let me join them. So that's what I was doing on VJ Day. We got into Salt Lake City the morning after. Boy, I told anybody who would listen, it's the only time I've ever seen Salt Lake City messy. Ordinarily, you could see yourself in there, the neatness, but
Mm-hmm.
they had paper all over the place.
So do you remember when the bombs had been dropped on Japan, essentially ending the war? Do you remember where you were? And
No, I don't, because that was all happening pretty much not simultaneously, but I was probably either laying around doing nothing in Midwest up the top, where they sent all of us from the 8th Air Force up there to hang around doing nothing until they could process. People were counting. You had to have so many points, I think they call them, and before you could be considered for discharge and that sort of thing. I'm talking about the whole bunch, enlisted or otherwise. And that's what we were doing up there. We're just getting ready to go back home, go get out, do whatever was happening.
Yeah.
So that lasted a while, and then that was when in trained and came out here, and VJ Day had happened the night before we got into Salt Lake.
Mhm.
So that had to have been what I was doing. I was not actually doing much of anything, but just waiting,
Yeah.
laying around.
Okay.
But
So I guess in conclusion, um, if there's any advice that you would have for current generation, future generations, is any wisdom that you could offer? What would that be?
keep the peace. I, taking everything into consideration, I always have concluded that I had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in my active duty 4 years, and some inactive duty, we still had to keep meetings, and the same man that I keep referring to, Bill Kettler,
Mm-hmm.
and I both had signed over to the reserve, and we had a squadron in Long Beach where we had to meet monthly, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. We didn't actually go over and march or anything like that, but we met for quite a while. We met in uniform. I had to buy the blue uniform instead of the old khakis.
Mm-hmm.
But taking, again, everything into consideration, since I ended up meeting an awful lot of nice people and enjoying a lot of excitement and entertainment and whatever, and all without a scratch on me that you could find, I had to admit that I had fun. But I can't advise somebody to go into something like that um, deliberately, expecting to have fun. It just wasn't there.
Yeah.
But totally different world now, of course. The simplification of apples and oranges doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's too many different things connected. But and I've gotten to know a lot of people that I had never dreamed of doing, like you and Matt. Matt latched on to me when he found out that I had flown with the 453rd. And I think it's his grandfather, I believe, it almost has to be, who also flew with them. And we looked at the dates, and we had, in all probability, we were flying at the same time. But I didn't know him. We've established that.
Mm-hmm.
But Matt hasn't let it go. With me, he stays in touch, but he has made a kind of a, would you call it? Simple word, but he has gone back to England, or has gone to England himself, at least twice. And this last time was deliberately to revisit Old Buckingham by design. I had this one open. There were pictures in here that he sent or brought may have since.
Were they?
Oh, this is my parents, my home in Middlesboro now, but it didn't look like this when I was there. These people, it used to have a porch and then a wall and an overhang roof all around here and down the side. And you know, Sandy and
Craig?
Craig. Sandy's sister lives in Middlesboro now,
No way.
and her health is not the greatest. But from where her sister lives, as far as I'm concerned, it's a long way, but they said it was just a little ways to walk from where they were. And so they came up here. I think they called me and asked for my old address, and I astounded them by being able to give it to them. 134 Edgewood Road, and this is Edgewood Road out here. It feels like two things, but I can't separate them, so.
Might just be thick paper.
No. But Middlesboro, I told you, is in the heart of the coal thing. This is the Chamber of Commerce in the coal house.
That's all made of coal?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's the same thing, only a different sign.
That's pretty neat.
No. Huh. It's a different sign, but it says the same thing.
Yeah.
It just works.